Every morning at exactly 7, Arthur left the house with the same quiet consistency he had followed for years. It didn't matter if the weather was warm or cold, if the sky was clear or filled with clouds. He always wore the same coat, slightly worn at the edges, and carried nothing but a small folded cloth in his pocket. To his family, it had become something they noticed but never fully understood. He never explained where he was going, and no one had ever asked him directly. It simply became part of who he was, a routine so steady that questioning it almost felt unnecessary. But to his grandson Daniel, it didn't feel that simple. From the window, he would watch Arthur walk down the path, his steps slow but steady, his gaze fixed ahead as if he already knew exactly where he was going. There was something in the way he moved, something quiet and distant, that made it feel like this routine carried more than just habit. One morning, Daniel decided to follow him, not out of suspicion, but out of curiosity that had grown too strong to ignore. He waited until Arthur had walked far enough, then quietly stepped outside, keeping a careful distance as he followed behind. The streets were still quiet at that hour, the world just beginning to wake. Arthur didn't look back. He simply continued walking, turning down familiar roads, passing places that meant nothing to Daniel but seemed to guide him with purpose. After several minutes, Arthur slowed down, his steps becoming more deliberate. He turned into a place Daniel hadn't expected, a place that felt calm and heavy at the same time. Daniel stopped at the entrance, his eyes widening slightly as he realized where Arthur had gone. It was a cemetery, quiet and still, with rows of headstones stretching across the ground in a silence that felt different from anywhere else. He hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, his movements slower now, more careful. Arthur continued walking without pause, his path steady as if he had walked it countless times before. Daniel followed at a distance, his gaze moving around, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. The air felt heavier here, not in a way that was frightening, but in a way that carried meaning. Arthur finally stopped in front of a single grave, his posture straight but calm. For a moment he didn't move at all. He simply stood there looking down. Daniel stayed back, watching quietly, unsure of what to expect. Then Arthur reached into his pocket and took out the small folded cloth Daniel had noticed before. He knelt down slowly, his movements careful, as if every action mattered. He began to clean the surface of the headstone, wiping away dust that wasn't even clearly visible. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't mechanical. It was gentle, almost respectful in a way that went beyond simple routine. After a moment, he placed the cloth aside and rested his hand lightly against the stone. Then quietly he began to speak. His voice was too soft for Daniel to hear clearly, but the tone carried something unmistakable. It wasn't just words, it was conversation. And in that moment, Daniel realized something that made him stand still. His grandfather wasn't just visiting this place. He was coming here to talk to someone who was no longer there. Daniel remained still for a moment, unsure whether to step closer or stay hidden where he was. There was something about the scene in front of him that felt too personal to interrupt. Arthur continued speaking softly, his voice low and steady, as if he had repeated these words many times before. After a while, Daniel took a few careful steps forward, closing the distance just enough to hear fragments of what was being said. "It's been the same without you," Arthur murmured, his hand still resting gently against the stone. "The house feels quieter, even when everyone is there." Daniel's breath slowed as he listened, his eyes shifting toward the headstone. The name carved into it was simple, but it carried a weight that became instantly clear. It was his grandmother's name. The realization settled deeply, changing everything he thought he understood about Arthur's routine. This wasn't just a visit. This was something much more. Arthur let out a quiet breath, his gaze fixed on the stone as if he could see beyond it. "I told you I'd keep things the same," he continued softly, "just like we always had." His words weren't filled with sadness alone. There was something else in them, something steady, something patient. Daniel felt a shift inside himself, a quiet understanding beginning to form. All those mornings, all those silent walks, they were never about being alone. They were about holding on to something that still mattered. Arthur picked up the cloth again, gently wiping one last time before placing it back in his pocket. He didn't rush. He didn't look away. He simply stayed there, present in a way that made the moment feel complete. And as Daniel stood there watching quietly, he realized something simple but powerful. His grandfather hadn't been keeping a secret. He had been keeping a promise. Arthur slowly stood up, his movements careful but steady, as if the time he spent there had given him something he needed before returning to the rest of the day. He looked down at the headstone for a moment longer, his expression calm, almost peaceful. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said softly, his voice carrying a quiet certainty. Then he turned and began to walk away, his steps unhurried, just like always. Daniel quickly stepped back, making sure he wasn't seen, his mind still processing everything he had just witnessed. The walk back felt different now. The same streets, the same turns, but everything carried a new meaning. Arthur wasn't just following a routine, he was continuing a connection that hadn't ended. When they reached home, Arthur stepped inside as if nothing unusual had happened, placing his coat in the same spot and moving through the house with quiet familiarity. Daniel watched him for a moment, unsure of what to say. Part of him wanted to ask, to understand more, but another part held back, respecting the silence that had existed for so long. Later that evening, as they sat together, Daniel finally spoke, his voice gentle. "Grandpa, where do you go every morning?" Arthur paused for a moment, his eyes lifting slowly. There was no surprise in his expression, no attempt to avoid the question, just a quiet understanding. He looked at Daniel carefully, then let out a soft breath. "To see someone," he replied simply. The answer was short, but it carried everything within it. Daniel nodded slowly, his gaze lowering for a moment before returning. He didn't ask anything else, because now he didn't need to. Some things weren't meant to be explained in detail. They were meant to be understood in silence. The next morning, Daniel woke up earlier than usual, his mind still holding on to everything he had seen the day before. The house was quiet, just as it always was at that hour, but now the silence felt different. It carried understanding instead of curiosity. He stepped quietly toward the window, watching as Arthur prepared to leave once again. The same coat, the same slow steps, the same direction. But this time Daniel didn't follow. He simply stood there, observing with a calm he hadn't felt before. There was no need to uncover anything more. He already knew what mattered. Arthur stepped outside and closed the door behind him gently, beginning his walk just as he always did. Daniel watched until he disappeared from view, then turned away slowly, his thoughts settling into something clearer. Later that day, when Arthur returned, Daniel noticed something he hadn't paid attention to before. There was a quiet lightness in the way he moved, something subtle but real. It wasn't happiness in the usual sense, but it wasn't sadness either. It was something balanced, something steady. As they sat together in the afternoon, Daniel looked at him for a moment before speaking softly. "You don't ever miss a day, do you?" Arthur glanced at him, a faint smile forming as he shook his head slightly. "No," he replied. "Some things shouldn't be skipped." His tone was calm, but it carried a quiet certainty that made the words feel important. Daniel nodded slowly, understanding more than he could put into words. This wasn't just about memory, it was about presence, about choosing to show up, even when no one was there to see it. The days continued to pass, each one following the same gentle rhythm, but Daniel no longer saw it as something repetitive. Instead, he saw it as something meaningful, something that carried purpose beyond what could be explained. One morning, he stepped outside just as Arthur was leaving, catching up to him after a few quick steps. Arthur looked slightly surprised but didn't question it. They walked together in silence at first, the quiet between them no longer uncomfortable. When they reached the cemetery, Arthur slowed slightly, glancing at Daniel as if to confirm that he understood where they were going. Daniel simply nodded, his expression calm. They walked the rest of the way together, stopping in front of the same grave. Arthur took out the cloth again, beginning his routine, while Daniel stood beside him, not speaking, just present. After a moment, Arthur looked up, his gaze shifting between the headstone and Daniel. "She liked mornings," he said softly, said they felt peaceful. Daniel smiled faintly, his eyes lowering for a moment before returning to the stone. "I think I understand that now," he replied quietly. Arthur nodded, a small sense of recognition passing between them. When they finished, they didn't leave immediately. They stood there for a while, the silence no longer empty but shared. And in that moment something changed. The routine that had once belonged to Arthur alone was no longer just his. It had become something passed on, something understood without needing to be explained. As they finally turned to leave, the morning light stretched softly across the ground, calm and steady. And for the first time, Arthur wasn't walking alone, because some routines aren't just habits, they're promises that continue, even when they're shared.